So hello and welcome everyone. It's so wonderful to see participants from all around the world joining us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. On behalf of Contact North, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Postplagiarism, Helping Students Maintain Academic Integrity in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. My name is Sarah Govero. I'm the Director of Teach Online and the Online Learning News at Contact North, and I'll be your host for this session. Before we get started, I'd like to begin with a provincial land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that Contact North's work and the work of our community partners takes place on traditional Indigenous territories across the province. We are grateful to be able to live and work on these lands. We express our gratitude to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have cared for these territories since time immemorial and who continue to strengthen communities across Ontario. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So we are using Zoom webinar today. That means participants' microphones and cameras will remain off. The chat is open, but please remember to select everyone on the drop-down menu when posting so that we can all see your comments or questions. But if you do have questions, we do ask you to use the Q&A tool located at the bottom of your screen. We have a large group today, so I won't be able to keep up with all the questions in the chat, but if you post in the Q&A, they will stay posted there. We will have time at the end of the session to do some of the questions, and you can also upvote any questions that resonate with you by clicking on the thumbs up icon. Live captioning is available. You can activate it by clicking the closed caption icon at the bottom of your screen. And after the webinar, I will post the recording and presentation slides on teachonline.ca, and I will share that link in the chat shortly. You'll also receive a link through the Zoom system in about 24 hours. All right, that's enough from me. Now on to our main event. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Sarah Eaton, Professor and Research Chair at the University of Calgary and an Honorary Associate Professor at Deakin University, Australia. Welcome, Sarah, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's a real honor, and welcome to everyone who's joined us today. I'm just amazed looking at the chat to see how many people we have from different countries all over the world. And I'm just going to bring up my PowerPoint slides and we'll dive right in. So today's topic is called Postplagiarism, Helping Students Maintain Academic Integrity in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And I should start by kind of grounding this work and saying that it is based in scholarship and research. It's based on broadly 3 books: a monograph on plagiarism in higher education, academic integrity in Canada, and the second handbook of academic integrity. And I also wanted to give shout outs to all of the contributors. Academic Integrity in Canada is an open access free book. You can download it, 599 pages of it free online. And we have some of the contributors here. So shout outs to all of the authors who contributed to that edited volume, as well as to the second handbook of academic integrity. Also, the work that I do is funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and supported by the University of Calgary Teaching and Learning Grants. So, and just in the interest of transparency, I have presented some of this content previously, and some of it with Leanne Morrow and Beatrice Moya, who contributed to some of the slide development as well. So setting the stage, I want to let everyone that I don't already know here. I see I've got some academic integrity colleagues. I call them academic integrity brothers and sisters and cousins here. I'm not a computer scientist, and I don't have a background in artificial intelligence, though it has been a focus of my work for about the past half decade. I'm trained as a humanist and as an educator, and come to this work through the lens of integrity and ethics. So just to kind of be really clear and transparent about that. What we know through our research, I can sum it up in one slide, and that's that artificial intelligence is here to stay. I've heard colleagues say things like, well, this is just another fad in education, and I've waited out other fads, and I will await this one out. Unfortunately, this is not a fad that we can wait out. It is here to stay, and in fact, the technological advancements that are happening at a pace faster than most of us can keep up with. What we know is that if we want students to be workforce ready when they graduate, regardless of their chosen field that they want to go in after they graduate, we must teach the ethical use of artificial intelligence across the curriculum. But the big question is, what counts as ethical use of AI? What I can tell you is that the jury's still out on that topic. So I wanted to also kind of set to the stage for today's presentation by just saying that generative AI, you'll hear me refer to it as GenAI or even AI. And sometimes we use the term ChatGPT as kind of a ubiquitous term for all GenAI apps or large language model apps. You may hear me use those terms, even though ChatGPT is one product from one company at one point in time. It's kind of become a bit of a ubiquitous thing, like Xerox, if you're from my generation, or Kleenex, or Scotties in Canada. But we know that this is a complex topic with a myriad of ethical concerns about them. We won't be able to address all of the concerns in today's webinar, and we won't even as a society be able to address them today or even this year. It's going to be an ongoing part of our conversations for years and years to come, certainly as the field continues to advance. There are so many ethical parts around this, including environmental impact, bias, data privacy, gender issues, etc. Today, I'm going to limit the talk to education and academic integrity specifically. And so this is the scope of today's webinar. And we'll also sort of look at the topic of assessment for students using AI as part of their learning, whether that use is authorized or unauthorized. Because I work in academic integrity, I like to start by setting the stage with some of our vocabulary. In our world, and when I say our world, I mean those of us who are academic integrity enthusiasts, advocates, researchers, administrators, and so on. We differentiate between academic misconduct and academic integrity. This continuum is one I put together with a couple of grad students that synthesizes some of the key thinkings in the field. And so I wanted to give a shout out to those grad students, Helen Pethrick and Crystal Turner. We talked about academic integrity at one end of this continuum as education, training for students, building a community around ethical conduct and our expectations within that learning community. That's what we would call academic integrity. This is largely founded on the work of Don McCabe, who's considered the grandfather of academic integrity and launched the International Center for Academic Integrity in 1999. McCabe and colleagues wanted to bring a positive spin on what was before only seen in a negative light, which would be academic misconduct. Or what we would call breaches or violations of academic integrity. This would include things like allegations of misconduct. Cheating is what we would, another term for it that we might use. I don't really like that term, but it's pretty common in the literature. Case management, if there's hearings or sanctions or appeals, that sort of sits in the academic misconduct side of the house. If you're an educator, you've been in this field for any length of time, there will have come a moment in your teaching career when you either suspect or you've observed an academic misconduct happening. And you think, oh my goodness, what do I do now? Who do I talk to? How do I address this? Are there policies? Are there procedures? And this creates this kind of critical incident. And we know that there's a lot of emotional labor for educators involved in this moment. Sometimes people think they don't want to report students for a variety of reasons, or others may think that they need to address it by themselves and not tell anyone. Most institutions in Canada have academic integrity policies and procedures. And if your school doesn't have these, I can tell you that there's lots of examples online for great academic integrity policies. Many policies now have kind of had an overlap with artificial intelligence, or many policies are being updated. In the policies that currently exist, at least in Canada, we have definitions of things like plagiarism, fabrication, falsification, unauthorized assistance. These are fairly common terms outlined in many policies. Some generative AI use that is unauthorized can fit in the existing policies that we have around things like fabrication or falsification or unauthorized use. So we may not need knee-jerk reactions in terms of having new policies around artificial intelligence. One of the cautions that I have here is that if we create a new policy today in 2024, that policy may be out just for artificial intelligence, that policy may be outdated within a year or two, simply because the technology is evolving so quickly. So if you're in a place where you're thinking about developing policies and procedures, then think about what we might call evergreen policies. And I know that there's some folks here who have worked on academic integrity policy development, as well as analysis. And if that's you, I would encourage you to share resources and links in the webinar chat, either to your academic integrity or artificial intelligence policies, or any analysis or scholarship that you've worked on. And I think I've got some colleagues here. So I'm going to ask you to be active during the chat today and also share as many resources as you can to help other people. One of the things that we know is that academic integrity looks different in different countries. So we want to be able to help each other as much as a global community as we can. If you're in this world, then you might think, if you do a lot of academic integrity work, then you might think that most students are out there cheating most of the time, and that really there's kind of a small percentage of people who don't cheat. This bell curve is based on work by a woman named Deborah Rohde. She's not an academic integrity person. She wrote a book in 2017 just called Cheating, and it includes different sections. There's financial fraud, financial cheating, intimate relationship cheating, academic integrity, or scholarly cheating, but she talks about this bell curve of normal. She doesn't have a figure in her book around the bell curve, but she talks about it. So I thought it would be helpful to have this visual of this kind of, here I've got this skewed bias of people who do not cheat at like small percentage, and then the rest of the world. But we know that a bell curve of normal has outliers at either end. So at one end, we will have people who never cheat, bless them. And at the other end, we will have people who intentionally and maliciously cheat. But what the research shows is that that percentage of the population, whether it's the population in society or the population in school, is relatively small. Most people are good people and they want to do the right thing. But if you put them in the wrong situation at the wrong time, they can make a poor decision. But at one end of the curve, we will have a small percentage of people, and I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but we might be some kind of like deviant behavior in there. And that's a different case. But like, think about 80% of our students as being good people. And when I show up for work, I want to show up for the 80%. And I hope that you'll join us as well. Thanks so much for the links that you're sharing in the chat. Feel free to share a little bit more in terms of your AI policies, etc. So framing some of this work in terms of academic integrity, there's different ways of looking at it. There's values-based ways, there's skills-based ways, and suffice to say that there's scholarship in different camps with different people working on this from a variety of different angles. You might see this as character development, as moral conduct based in values, or you might be on the other side of a continuum that said that, well, this is about academic literacies, or you might have a foot in both camps. So one of the questions I have for you is, when we think about academic misconduct, do you see it as being a morality issue, or do you see it as being an academic literacies issue, or somewhere in between, or both? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. And just so that you know that there's bodies of literature around this and researchers and scholarships going back. I mean, as we mentioned before, Don McCabe was the grandfather of academic integrity, is what he's been called, dating back more than 30 years. And there's been a real uptick in academic integrity research and scholarships, certainly since COVID-19. Yeah, okay, and thank you for sharing in the chat academic literacy and culture issues. So thank you for pointing out that culture plays a role in this as well. We know that our understandings of plagiarism, what is cheating, what is not cheating, are culturally and contextually bound. So what we have in North America may not reflect the values or views from other places, or even within North America, we have differences, as this chart kind of shows. Certainly here in Canada, we've been having more and more conversations about decolonizing academic integrity and education generally. I wanted to highlight this project that was done at the University of Calgary as one example of Indigenous perspectives on academic integrity. We know that Indigenous cultures are not a monolith and that there are many different Indigenous cultures. So this project was conducted by a woman named Kita Gladue at the University of Calgary, and she has a webinar and a written resource and a website. When we first started working with Kita at the University of Calgary, she said she wanted to talk about academic integrity through her culture and through her lens, which was through storytelling. And Kita Gladue also developed this original iconography that you see on the screen because she talks about Indigenous principles for academic integrity, with the one at the top being relationality. And she draws here from an Indigenous scholar, I think it's Sean Wilson, and he says, relationality, I am because you are. And thinking about relationships, not just shaping reality, but being reality. This is something that has been implicit in some of the academic integrity research, scholarship, advocacy. One thing I really like about this project by Kita Gladue is she brings it to the foreground and makes it a central part of the conversation. And thinking about reciprocity and the roles that we serve. And she talks about inherent in a commitment to people is the understanding of the reciprocity of life and accountability to one another, drawing there from Hart's work. The idea of being accountable to one another, rather than just being accountable to regulations or policies, but being accountable to one another as people. Very different take on academic integrity in terms of historical norms. But she also talks about respect. In this framing, she talks about nothing about us without us. This phrase was started by disability advocates and disability justice advocates several decades ago, and she's brought it in and reframed it through this lens of if you have policies that affect us, then include us in their development and revision and application. She talks here, drawing from the work of Smith, Indigenous knowledge extends beyond the environment. However, it has values and principles about human behavior and ethics, about relationships, wellness, and leading a good life. So we see elements or echoes of morality in here as well, leading a good life. And knowledge has beauty and can make the world beautiful if used in a good way. So the idea of knowledge being beautiful is really important to this framing. So I share this as one possible alternative framing and also a way of showing different cultural understandings of what it means to learn and teach with integrity. But today's program is about post-plagiarism. So I'll talk a little bit about this. Some of you, if you've been engaged with this work before, will have seen this infographic in other places. I won't go through the entire infographic today, but I will give you the source for it. So I can say that this work it was a culmination of work that happened over a number of years. I edited a journal called the International Journal for Educational Integrity. I think we've got some of our contributors here, editorial board members, peer reviewers. Thank you for being here with us today. Once a year, I write an editorial for this journal, and I take a big idea that's kind of been brewing for a while, and I ground it in some of the research written by the best scholars in the world, and then I issue a call to action for how we can make our field even better than it already is. This infographic was shared in the editorial from last year, and I'll also share the editorial from this year, which just came out. But this idea of that's Kita Gladue's Indigenous Academic Integrity site for you there. But last year's editorial was around post-plagiarism and looking at a world where artificial intelligence is here to stay. And what does that mean for integrity, ethics, and teaching and learning? You can read the whole editorial there if you want. It's got this infographic. I unpack each piece of it. The key highlights from this are that human AI hybrid writing would become the norm. This infographic was from 2023, and here we are moving towards the end of 2024. And I think we can say that this is becoming a reality for many of us, thinking about the ways that human creativity can be enhanced. One thing I'll mention here is that the need, I guess, to decouple human creativity and our ability to be creative from people who make their lives from creative enterprises. So there's a lot of, we talked about the bias, the debates, the concerns. There are real concerns from people who make their lives from creative enterprises, writing, photography, etc., having their work appropriated, misused, used without their consent, and integrated into the databases that are used to train AI. This is a real ethical concern. This is different from the threat by AI to our human ability to be creative. So thinking about decoupling those two big concepts as an ethical perspective is really important because it has a place for teaching and learning. Our students still have the ability to be creative, and that won't be compromised. There is, as yet, no evidence, empirical evidence to suggest that this new technology will in any way compromise our ability to be smart or to be creative or to inspire or inspire others. If you're interested in the topic of technologies and their impact on society, one person whose work I really like and I'm happy to recommend is that of Amy Orban. She's got a great article from before ChatGPT was produced, looking at the Sisyphean cycle of technology panics. In this article, Orban talks about a 20th century technology that sent ripples of fear through society, made parents think that it would make their children stupid, and result in moral turpitude. That technology was the radio. Thinking about each generation having a technology that creates panic and fear and eventually gives way to the next generation of technology. For my generation, that was the television. My dad would plunk me down in front of his favorite TV show, which happened to be Star Trek. My mom would come in the living room and say, "Get her away from that thing. It will make her stupid." The generation after me, it was the internet and screen time for kids. That conversation is still ongoing. I think at this point we've accepted that the radio and the television are here to stay, and the conversation around the internet, phones, mobile phones, that still continues, and we have layered on a new conversation around artificial intelligence. And thank you for pointing out as well, creativity and learning are two different things. One of the things I hear in the conversations is this threat that somehow AI will jeopardize individuals' ability to be creative or to think. We don't have evidence of that. We do have more and more evidence of language barriers being overcome by AI applications, and that technologies will exist that will allow us to transcend the barriers that currently separate us. And so if you're thinking that things like having your students create videos or podcasts is something that will ensure that they're not using AI, I'm here to tell you that applications already exist for students to create any kind of multimedia, assisted or done completely by AI. So that takes us over to the other side here and thinking about a key aspect for academic integrity is this: as humans, we can relinquish control if we want to an AI. I can relinquish control to write my reports to ChatGPT, for example. Students can do the same with their papers, you know this. What we don't relinquish is our responsibility for the output. So let me give you an example. If a student submits a paper to you that is written in whole or in part by ChatGPT, they have outsourced part of that work or all of that work, but what they haven't outsourced is their responsibility to ensure that the content is true and that the facts are real, that there's no misinformation or disinformation, that the references and source material are new. A year ago, we were talking about confabulation, hallucination, or the way that AI apps would make up references. But in the past year, that's also evolved. And more, there are more tools out there that will allow students to get real sources and real references. So when we think about assessment of student learning, we have to think about what are we assessing and why. One of the people whose work, or I guess a couple of the people whose work I really like on assessment are folks associated with the Cradle, a Center for Research on Assessment and Digital Learning at Deakin University. I hold an honorary position there, and they talk a lot about assessment. It's the big thing. A couple of years ago, one of their researchers, Margaret Behrman, partnered with another research there, Rosemary Luckin, and they talk about preparing university assessment for a world with AI. This is, in my opinion, one of the best articles out there on AI and assessment, or assessment in the age of AI. And I'll give you the Coles notes for it and say that they talk about two things being important for assessment of students today. One, assessing metacognitive skills, helping and assessing students' ability to learn and be aware of themselves as learners, not just creating a transaction where you give an assignment and a student gives you a product. How do we know students are learning? Actually, Tricia Bertram-Gallant asked that same question for academic integrity. So the connections between integrity and assessment are clear. So metacognition, how do you know that your students are aware of themselves as learners? The other thing they talk about is called evaluative judgment. This is it's critical thinking, but it's more than critical thinking. They talk about students and humans cultivating an ability to understand what quality is and demand quality of themselves and of others. So if you get an output from ChatGPT, people will say, oh, well, the writing is crap. Well, syntactically, grammatically, orthographically, the writing is not crap, but in terms of the thinking and the depth of analysis, it may be deficient. This is where evaluative judgment comes in and teaching students, how do we know what counts as quality? That's a key question that you can ask your students even if they're in junior high. How do we know that this work written by somebody else is quality? How do you know your homework that you're submitting to me is quality? What counts as quality? So having those conversations with students is helpful as well. Yeah, thank you for somebody for pointing out Cole's notes, Cliff notes. I'm dating myself when I say those things. I could just say a brief summary. So that idea from Rosemary Luckin and Margaret Behrman's worth checking out. In my world, attribution still remains important, and thinking about the ways that we can attribute our work to one another. You've heard me do that throughout this session today in different ways. I've got citations on the screen. I do it orally. I share resources from other people. This for me is part of what I like to call the ethos of attribution. If you are incorporating principles of decolonization and indigenization into your teaching and learning, thinking about attribution rather than citing and referencing can be an important part of the conversation. Because I see citing and referencing as these are technical skills that we have developed over time, but attribution is something that we do to pay respect to others. And in fact, many of our citing and referencing manuals do a really lousy job, for example, of allowing us to cite and reference, give props, or attribute Indigenous knowledge. So one of the resources that I love to share with you today is by a woman named Larissa McLeod of the James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, and she talks about templates for citing Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers. This is a terrific reference, and other university libraries and other libraries have used this to build their own templates. So thinking about the ways that we can give respect to other people and the knowledge that they have. But finally, what we know is that whatever we thought that plagiarism was before, it's being challenged. We don't have a new definition of plagiarism yet. But when I talk about post-plagiarism, I'm talking about an era in human society when advanced technology, and I say AI here, but other kinds of advanced technologies are a normal part of our life, and including how we teach and learn and interact daily. And it it heralds a new intellectual age and the age of advanced technologies. So together with this work, I'd like to give a shout out here to my friend and colleague, Dr. Rahul Kumar, because he's been actually testing those principles that we had on the previous slide in research-based ways, and he is about to publish some work on that. So together, he and I have started a website around this. We just started it. It's brand new. There's only a couple of blog posts there right now, but this is going to be our hub for our post-plagiarism research work around this. What we know right now is that our historical definitions of plagiarism and misconduct may require questioning and reconsideration. This is the big thing that we're working on now as we academic integrity advocates and experts around this. We know that the idea of simply taking somebody else's work and using it, that is a historical definition of plagiarism. Many people here will know cut and paste plagiarism. But remember, cut and paste plagiarism didn't exist before the internet because cut and paste didn't exist before the internet. Before that, people were handwriting out or retyping from an original source. So the idea that you could very quickly grab large chunks of text and simply put them in essay and call it your own, something that didn't exist really before 30 years ago. So we're at this point now where we know that humans can use AI to generate. We don't know necessarily how the databases were used to train those AI models. It's considered a black box. We know from enough reports out there that copyrighted material has been used to train those models. And now, just this year, academics around the world, people like me, we publish articles in journals that are owned by big publishers like Springer, Wiley, Taylor and Francis. We have learned that all of those publishers have sold our articles to some of the companies that are creating large language models. So when we write a paper, we sign the copyright, we transfer the copyright over to the journal, over to the publisher, and the publisher can do whatever they want with it. They hold the copyright. And in many cases, they have sold thousands and thousands and thousands of scholarly articles to these large language models. That is becoming another revenue stream for the publisher. So again, thinking about decoupling making a living from creative enterprises, and then our ability to be creative. I have no control. Once I signed things over to a publisher, they own it. And this is the case for people who write fiction, nonfiction, and who sell their rights or they give their rights to a publisher. So this idea of plagiarism and what we had as cut and paste plagiarism is being rewritten. And we know, for example, that AI detection tools have some limitations, and I'll talk a little bit about that. When we think about academic integrity, we can think about what we call a wraparound approach to academic integrity. We keep the students at the heart of everything we do. Students have responsibilities to act and learn ethically, follow the rules. What we want to know is that students are learning. But in addition, the ideas about this are also changing, and that educators, administrators, professional staff, and even community and industry and government also have responsibilities. This doesn't absolve students of their responsibilities to be honest and act in ethical ways, but it means that we're sort of layering on some other responsibilities for different groups. So for educators, we think about practicing ethical decision-making in the classroom, assessing students in ways that would be considered fair, just, and transparent. And for those who work in administration, especially around misconduct, thinking about things like having clear policies, having clear procedures and resources, and that administrators lead by example. We have seen examples in academic misconduct of individuals who have taken plagiarism into their own hands. And in some schools, in some places in the world, the individual teacher has the right to decide the outcome for plagiarism or academic misconduct. That is not the case in most Canadian universities and most Canadian schools. If you're in K-12, generally you would report an alleged academic misconduct to the principal or the vice principal, and then they would, as an administrator, make decisions about it. What we want to avoid are cases where individuals act in without telling anybody, without letting their superiors know that there's a case of, or an allegation of misconduct, and just deal with it privately and secretly. And I'm saying this because there was a case this year, earlier in Canada, that made the news because a university professor was criminally charged for the manner in which they addressed plagiarism with their students, because they didn't tell anybody, they didn't report it. Instead, they offered the students an alternative form of punishment that included going to the professor's home and being beaten with a stick. I am not kidding you when I say this. There's one of the news stories that came out about this, and I'll post another news story here. Yep, this is true. This is happening in Canada in 2024. This is not widespread. Let me reassure you, this is not widespread. Most educators in Canada do not do this. But my point here is that as educators, if we think we found any kind of misconduct, don't keep it a secret, please. Tell somebody, tell an administrator, school principal, associate dean, whoever is your sort of superior in your school, so that the sanctions or the investigation can happen at an administrative level. And my other point here is, if this has happened in Canada, a country that is considered generally to be a low corruption country, what's happening in other countries. So what we want to do is ensure that the processes that we have for students are fair and just. And there's also responsibilities here for professional staff. Yeah, that incident, along with a couple of others, led me to kind of this year's editorial. I talked about, once a year I do a big editorial. I'm going to share this one for you, because it's brand new. It just came out this week. And I'm thinking more and more in my work with students of academic integrity about human rights and dignity. And one question I have for you is, to what extent are you ensuring that if students go through an academic misconduct investigation, that we make every attempt to preserve their dignity as human beings? And I say this because in the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the word dignity is mentioned no less than 6 times. Dignity. But when I talk with many people about misconduct and the ways that they address students, the topic has almost never come up. And so thinking about our students as human beings. And yeah, another thing that's in the UN Declaration of Human Rights here is the idea that there's a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. This is a basic and fundamental human right. And it's one that is even common criminals have the right to be presumed innocent until a full and thorough investigation has been conducted to give evidence to the contrary. That is a basic human right. If that is not articulated in your policies, then your policies need to be revised. How often now have I heard educators say, oh, well, I know my students use ChatGPT, so I know they're cheating. Well, one, knowing your students use ChatGPT may or may not constitute misconduct, depending on the regulations and the expectations you've set out for your students. But if you think there's a reason for concern around misconduct, a full investigation is warranted, because under the Declaration of Human Rights, human beings have the right to be presumed innocent. And just because students might have used the word delve or some other indicator that comes from ChatGPT, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily committing misconduct. And if they're committing misconduct, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad people. And the affordances that are outlined in the Declaration of Human Rights can be a foundation for academic integrity policy and procedures. And I'll share another project that I worked on recently here. Yes, and more words through this in the chat. Thank you for sharing these. Thinking about designing policies and procedures in what's called a human rights by design approach. In other words, foregrounding human rights and keeping human rights at the center of that, or using human rights as a way to inform policy development and procedure. The idea of human rights by design is actually related to artificial intelligence policies and comes from the Council of Europe. And I first found out about this a few months ago. Well, I was working on a project with UNESCO, and our project with UNESCO is complete now. And we were preparing an Outlook study on artificial intelligence and gender. And so this whole study, it's free to download, as many UNESCO documents are, looked at the gender, I guess, implications for artificial intelligence, and various things on it. I worked on the policy part of it, and we applied some of the same frameworks that we use for academic integrity policy to that project. And for some of the academic integrity folks here who that I've worked with on policy analysis, you may find some of your work referenced in that report. So one of the things I'll share with you here is the idea of the human rights by design approach. As I mentioned, it's done by the Council of Europe. We incorporated it into the UNESCO project around gender and AI, and I extended that thinking to academic integrity. And the Council of Europe came out with this human rights by design of future-proofing human rights protection in the era of AI. If there is one single document that I recommend that you read if you are developing or revising academic integrity policies for AI, it's this document from the Council of Europe. For me, this was a game changer and really helped me rethink and reframe our academic integrity and by centering human rights at everything that we do. So thank you for sharing that document as well, the news story in the chat. So if you are struggling to develop policies or revise policies, centering human rights can be one way to help frame the conversation so that we keep humans at the core of everything that we're doing. So in terms of assessment for AI, I'm going to share some tips with you here. And I also mentioned that I'm going to share the slide deck with Sarah Govro at the end. You'll have the complete slides. You're also welcome to take screenshots of any of this, but thinking about assessment in the age of AI, here's some tips. Sort of aggregated and curated from some of the existing literature. But the first and most important one is to provide clear guidelines for our students on when and how AI tools can be used. In universities, if a student is taking 5 different courses, they might go into 5 classrooms and have 5 very different experiences with each of their professors. Some professors may ban the use of AI in their classroom, whereas others may insist on its use. So thinking about articulating clear guidelines for students is essential in this work. And if your school doesn't have policies or procedures around AI, artificial intelligence, we have guidelines at my university, but our individual professors still have a lot of autonomy. But thinking more and more about, okay, within that autonomy, doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to be transparent to our students. And also talking to our students about what constitutes ethical use and what doesn't. And disentangling the idea of between offloading one's work and then getting an assist with the work. We also know the work of Brenda McDermott and others has been really helpful here in thinking about the ways that AI tools can provide an assist for persons with disabilities. So I'm going to share some work by Brenda McDermott because she's a disability advocate and talks a lot. She's also a collaborator on our research project and talks about this kind of idea here. And this is a chapter in the second handbook that Brenda's written, but she has some other work out there as well. So this will give you a clue as to how to get in touch with her to find more of her work. But thinking about the ways that AI tools can be used to assist persons with learning disabilities, developmental disabilities, or learning difficulties that may be undiagnosed or undocumented. And then designing assessments that require critical thinking for students and having them touch points with you through the whole process. And the idea of a process-oriented assessment, drafts, outlines, presentations, all of that, which to be fair, can be done by AI, but the idea of scaffolding for the learner and helping them engage with the content and the material. I think it's Phil Dawson who talks about that AI can reasonably do some things, and there is still some knowledge that we want humans, people, to have internalized. And I like the example that Phil uses in some of his presentations. And he says, you know, when he goes to the doctor, he wants the doctor to know the anatomy of the human body and to know where the different organs and bones are and what certain things are. He doesn't want them to have someone to have to look that up in an app. In many professions, it is still essential to have internalized knowledge, not only around ethical decision-making, but foundational knowledge that helps people to do their job or means that they can do their job effectively. And thinking as well about AI assessments that AI cannot replicate: creativity, analysis, metacognition. How do we know people are learning? And how do we know what counts as quality? And what are the competencies needed for a particular course? These will be important questions, but thinking not necessarily only about the content, but also about the competencies and incorporating in-class writing and presentations. This has been offered as one possibility. So these are not meant to be prescriptive or silver bullet or here's the answer to misconduct, but rather as possibilities for helping to teach and learn and assess with integrity. And also teaching information literacy and source evaluation. Basically, this is talking about teaching students the difference between fake news, so to speak, misinformation, disinformation, but also the quality of the work that they're reading, and to be able to evaluate where is information coming from and how do they know it's good. And then the value of original thought for personal growth. And knowing that many of our learners will want to grow and learn as human beings, and that remains important. At the same time, they also need a credential to help them get a job, keep a job, advance in their job, etc. and then thinking about creating this culture of integrity through positive reinforcement. So there's all kinds of different things going on here. There is no silver bullet in terms of the perfect assessment for creating cheat-proof assignments. Our colleague in Australia, Professor Kath Ellis, she has a saying that I think is worth sharing. She says, "You can't design cheating out of an assessment, but you sure as hell can design it in." And what I think she means by that is saying that certain kinds of assessments lend themselves to potentially being more susceptible to academic integrity violations. So teachers had the same test for 20 years. They keep reusing the same test. That is a kind of a classic example of an assessment that could be susceptible to cheating. But we also know that in thinking about assessment tools, AI-powered assessment tools. So this is another sort of framing of this for educators. Educators are now asking, where are my AI apps? I want the AI apps to help me. Well, they're here and they already exist. We know that AI-powered assessment tools for educators can help us with efficiency with grading and feedback. Automated grading has been around for a long time. So also thinking about the difference between automation and artificial intelligence. Those two are different, but they can be related and they can overlap. If you're teaching a mega lecture with 500 students, automated grading has probably been part of your reality for a while. And now we're sort of leveling up in terms of the feedback to students. There can be potential for more frequent assessments of student learning and consistency in evaluation across large groups. So in other words, that grading, marking, and feedback can be consistent when we use AI-powered tools for assessment. There may be personalized learning paths. I've heard AI described as a pauper's tutor or poor person's tutor, whereas tutoring may have previously been reserved for those with financial privilege. Some AI tools offer students a 24/7 availability for practice and self-assessment and reduce teacher workload. So we have different groups of people wanting to offload different kinds of work for different reasons. Educators saying, I'm too stressed, I don't have enough time, my classes are too big, I need assistance. That assistance is probably not coming for us in terms of more human resources, but it may come in terms of AI. So thinking about what constitutes ethical assessment from an educator perspective is as important a part of the conversation as students using AI. Some of you who have heard me give talks before will remember this phrase that I say often: students are not our enemy, they are our future. And so part of our job as educators is to prepare them for that future. So thinking about the ways that we can use AI ethically for student learning and teacher pedagogy and assessment, both sides of that coin are important. In the time that we have, I kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about, we call that academic integrity arms race. And it basically goes something like this: that a new technology comes onto the scene. For my generation in teaching, it was the internet. And everybody tries to figure out what this new technology is and how to use it, and we're mandated to use it for teaching and learning and assessment. And as we educators are learning how to use it in our professional practice, young people are practicing and experimenting and having fun, often using it for entertainment. And sometimes they might also use it to be mischievous. And then we enter companies that tell us that they have the solution to misconduct by selling us products that will help us detect cheating, solve cheating, reduce misconduct. The anti-cheating technology industry is massive and has been around since, it really started to proliferate with the internet. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And despite all of the anti-cheating technologies that have existed for 30 years, we haven't actually seen rates of misconduct decrease. So it begs the question, do the technologies actually work? And what are we trying to prove when we're catching students rather than giving them chances to demonstrate their learning? Because we know that our students are smart and they will find workarounds. They will find hacks and they will share ideas online about how to beat the anti-cheating technology. And if you haven't already been aware of technologies that will help students with generated AI text, I'll share one with you now. This is not an endorsement. but rather, in case you were unaware, that there are now hundreds, thousands of applications for students out there that will help them so-called humanize text that they've generated using ChatGPT. So here's how that works. A student would use ChatGPT to generate a text, and then they would run it through a humanizer. Here's one example. Again, this is an example, not an endorsement, that would humanize the text and make it sound less like ChatGPT. So if you think that you're using AI, so-called AI gen text detection tools to catch students, please stop trying to catch students, because these tools are available to students and they can run it through technology. So we can't use technology to solve a human problem. And misconduct is a human problem. And also here to kind of show some of the differences between text matching software, sometimes erroneously called plagiarism detection software. Most of us in our field don't like that term, but lots of people use it. And then AI detectors or text detectors. There's some differences between them. Text matching software can detect textual similarities through text matching algorithms. They use databases, a corpus as well. And the content generations of AI can challenge text matching software because things can be so quickly changed or adapted or edited. With AI detectors, they're based on, they can use statistical or watermark-based or classifier-based or retrieval-based approaches. And they're typically provided in percentages, scales, or binaries to indicate the possibility of the presence or absence of AI-generated text. If you would like me to sum this up for you in one sentence, AI detectors don't work. Don't use them. Because they have a lot of limitations, as has been shown by now study after study after study. These limitations include false positives and false negatives. There's a researcher in the US, Whitney Gegg Harrison. She works with a colleague, Claire Quarterman. They have done some preliminary tests. Whitney Gegg Harrison is an autistic individual and has produced writing samples by other autistic individuals, run them through AI, so-called AI text detectors. 100% of the text came back as being identified or flagged as written by AI, when in fact it was written by humans, and she supervised the writing. So the idea of false positives and false negatives are real. That was one study. It was a small study. There are, as yet, to my knowledge, no large-scale studies to look at the ways that AI text detectors may discriminate against individuals. But there is evidence to suggest that there is bias with persons who speak English as an additional language, for example. We also know that these tools have variations in sensitivity and specificity, but we also know that if writing is generated by ChatGPT, run through a paraphrasing spinner or a machine translation like Google Translate, and then back translated to English, if it's been human edited, that really decreases the efficacy of the AI detectors. In other words, we cannot rely on these tools. And also there are many, many workarounds of them. So I'll say it again as I'm getting ready to wrap up here, that students are not our enemy. They are our future. And thinking about the ways that we can help students bring their best selves to our classrooms, to our labs, to our workplaces, and beyond will help them be the best generation that they can be. Because I started out by saying, as Amy Orban pointed out, that every generation has its technology. ChatGPT is the one for this generation, but what's coming after that, nobody can say for sure. But what we can say is that the technological advances will continue. And those children today who are in school, they will have new technological challenges in 20 or 30 years or less. So building on the idea of human rights by design and prioritizing learning for our students, I would recommend that we prioritize compassion over content, treating our students as human beings first and foremost, prioritizing decency and dignity over deadlines. If your student needs a little bit more time to do the work, then please consider giving it to them. And I'm not suggesting we should throw respect for deadlines out the windows, knowing that I'm on a deadline to finish this webinar, but rather thinking about the ways that we can help our students live with dignity and learn with dignity and prioritize compassion and decency for them. And finally, prioritizing pedagogy over punishment. I tell my students, I am here to teach and you're here to learn. If you're not learning, I'm not doing my job. So help me do my job so that you can be the best learners you can be. That's all of the time that we have today. We have a couple of minutes for questions. So maybe, Sarah, I can ask you to maybe highlight a couple of questions we have in the Q&A, and we can go over them together.
Sounds great. Would you prefer for me to read them out?
Sure.
Okay. I have one from Ruth. She says, I teach essay writing. I'd like to know your thoughts on how AI seems to make everything I teach irrelevant. What is the new standard for AI use in essay writing classes?
Oh my goodness. I'm not sure that I have the answer for you, but what I can say is that there's many people with this same question, and I'm not sure if you're on Facebook or not, but I can say that there are many online communities who are discussing this exact same question. So I'm going to give a shout out to my friend and colleague Laura Duman, who runs this Facebook group called It's for Higher Ed, Discussions of AI Writing and Use. There's now almost 9,000 members. And we talk about this very question every day, every week. We share resources. One thing I can share with you is this, is that you're not irrelevant. Your students still need you to show up and be a great teacher for them. And maybe one of the possibilities that we could think about is having conversations with your students about how are they using this, what's working for them, what's not, and then how can they evaluate the output of some of the AI apps to be able to determine what's quality and how can they improve upon it or do even better. But I can tell you that you're not alone in this question. I don't think anybody in the world has the answer right now, but as in community, mostly online, because many of us are isolated working with a couple of us at our institutions, whereas online we can connect this way and get input from a lot of different people. So I hope that that's helpful. Sorry, I don't have the answer for you.
Great, thank you. I have a question from Patrick. Patrick, how can we better engage with educators to help them understand the need for dialogue and reassessment regarding AI tool usage? There's so much focus on learner usage, but to account for this, educators need to learn themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we see the whole gamut of this on across university campuses, right? We see professors that are early adopters and real enthusiasts, and we see others that really object to the technology and prohibit its use. I've had colleagues tell me that they hate ChatGPT. And when I ask them what they hate about it, they say, I don't know, I've never tried it. So in terms of, I think educators need hands-on opportunities to try the technologies for themselves. Maybe it's through a supervised workshop or some time for that they can have. One of the great examples I've seen is called an AI playground, where people can go to a computer and try it somebody else's account, and they can see what it's like and talk it through with someone. But hands-on experience and training is my number one recommendation there.
Okay, excellent. I think we might have time for one more. Let's see here. Mohammed asked, does writing with AI constitute plagiarism, or does it signify a novel mode of composition that necessitates a distinct ethical framework? Where should
Mhm.
institutions differentiate the boundary between permissible AI assistance and academic dishonesty?
Mm. This is kind of another one of those big questions. And I think we can turn to the principle of transparency here for artificial intelligence. And what works today might not work tomorrow. But having the students declare their use of AI, maybe talk about what tools they used, how they used it, how it helped them, what they thought the limitations of the tool were. Does the use of like ChatGPT or similar technologies automatically constitute misconduct or plagiarism? My knee-jerk reaction is no. That's why we're working in the post-plagiarism community to sort of think about what comes after cut and paste plagiarism. Nobody has all the answers right now, but we also know that some of those large language models are based on a corpus of language that may have been plagiarized or may have been appropriated from people, or their intellectual contributions may have been used without their permission or knowledge. So it's quite tricky, but I can say that the cut and paste plagiarism, although it still exists, may slowly be being superseded by the use of AI apps. We don't yet have, as a community, a global community, or even local communities, new definitions for these things. But I would say that transparency and setting expectations are two foundational principles we could draw from.
All right, wonderful. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you, Dr. Eaton, for your insightful and timely presentation on the impacts of generative AI in teaching, learning, and academic integrity. The significant turnout today just reflects how essential and relevant this topic is for educators as we navigate the opportunities and challenges AI brings to education. So thank you so much.
It's been a
And a big
pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us and for participating with your engaging questions and interacting within the chat. I know there's been a number of inquiries about the recording. Yes, it will be sent out by Zoom in about 24 hours. Or you can also check back on teachonline.ca under the webinar series tabs. And as soon as the recording has processed, I will post it there as well as all of the other resources that Dr. Eaton has provided. And I'll share the chat script as well, because I know there was lots of items shared and lots of comments that people want to take note of. So that will all be posted. If you have any further questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to me. We appreciate your time and hope to see you at our next Contact North webinar. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Eaton. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.